Here.
John Windsor and Terry Casto have asked to be excused, and we are expecting Stephanie Ely and Courtney Barker. We have a quorum.
This time I'd like us to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time I think we need to, is it a motion for approval of the agenda?
Yes, I'll make the motion to approve the agenda.
Oh, sorry. That's the bottom of the line drive for it from here.
Motion approved?
We need a vote.
Sorry? Yes,
All
we
those
do
in
need, we need a vote on that motion, sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And the minutes.
And the approval of the minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, next up is going to be our monthly progress and fiscal reports presented by Virginia.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to try to just hit on the highlights because we've got 3 great speakers today, and I think you're going to want time to interact with them. We have completed a number of projects since our last meeting. So the City of Cocoa has completed their Church Street Generation 2 baffle box. The Marine Resources Council finished the Cocoa Beach Country Club shoreline planting, and they've started the Lagoon House planting. That's already underway. We have our septic analysis in support of the septic ordinance, the septic moratorium to be followed by a septic ordinance well underway. We've got notice to proceed on 2 more septic to sewer projects, Sykes M and T. The Oak Alley Muck dredging project, we've issued a notice to proceed for design and engineering. Or, I'm sorry, we've had the pre-application meeting with Florida DEP. On the muck dredging master permit, we're issuing task orders for seagrass and bathymetric surveys that are required by the permitting agencies. Muck Finders has completed probing in the Mullet Creek area down south. And you want to pull up the video? Under the work underway, the second bullet, you've got the dates for many public hearings associated with the septic ordinance. So I just wanted you to have awareness that those are going on. The grass clipping outreach is also underway. We've had a meeting with the consultant, and surveys are getting going. So the only other thing I want to talk about here is the MIMS project. So we have a video showing how it was going, and then Walker's going to come up and give you some additional information.
Here we are at the MIMS muck removal dredge material management area. What you see behind me is the slurry of muck material that's being pumped from the project area about a mile away. It's a combination of the muck material and water. The muck in this particular area releases a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus into the water column that contribute to the algae blooms that we've seen throughout the lagoon. We pump it in here, and ultimately what we do is we dry the material enough to get it in a truck, and then we haul it away for ultimate disposal. For this particular project area, this material is coming out of an old agricultural channel that was dredged in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's along the west shoreline of the Indian River up here in MIMS. This particular area, it's prime seagrass habitat all around where we're dredging. The channel has acted as a sump for the muck material, so there's 3 to 4 feet of muck that is filled in this channel, and all around this channel is the seagrass. The seagrass habitat is prime feeding habitat for manatees. We've seen a number of manatees in and around our project area. It's also prime habitat for benthic critters that like to live in and around the seagrasses, and all of the other animals and wildlife that like to feed on the critters that live in the seagrass. It's really important that we get this stuff out of this particular area, and create some more habitat for the bottom-dwelling critters that we see in the benthic environment. So this is one of many of our muck removal projects that are part of our Save Our Indian River Lagoon plan and part of our effort to clean up the lagoon.
So I just wanted to give you all a quick update on MIMS. The project, it's kind of following up a positive video. The project has been shut down since June 26th. The contractor was struggling to meet the nutrient concentration requirements of the effluent water, meaning the water that's being pumped back to the lagoon. So the contractor needed to adjust the dosing rates for the polymers and the flocks that will be removing the nutrients from the effluent water. So we have submitted a permit modification request to the DEP, and we are awaiting a response on approval of that permit modification so the contractor can fire back up the project and start hitting the effluent treatment concentrations.
Question. Is that request to the DEP to change the allowable limits of the effluent, or?
No, it's a request to adjust the dosing amounts of the polymers. The way that the dosing works is they submitted it's 32 pound. Look, for example, they're looking for a target concentration of dosing of 32 pounds per dry ton of material. That's what they want to be allowed to dose to achieve the nutrient concentration level. So it has nothing to do with water quality. There's been no violations in terms of state water quality requirements like the turbidity standards. This is just to achieve the nutrient concentration requirements of our contract.
The extra requirements that Brevard
Yes.
added to the contract.
That's
beyond
not,
the
those are
permit
not
conditions.
state requirements.
Is there any way to broaden the future contract language for future dredging to use the nutrient goal rather than the dosing, or to provide a range of dosing amounts to achieve that goal? Shift a goal-driven contract rather than one that's specified. I mean, there'll have to be some flexibility in the writing and so on, but I think that's worth looking at. And if it's not a permit matter other than changing numbers.
If I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, are you referring to because the way the contract...
The contract is a performance.
Yeah, the contract is performance-based. They have a concentration requirement target.
Okay.
Right.
Then is it possible to build flexibility as to the dosing amount into the permit application? That's an area that FDEL should, they should be interested in that. Because it cuts down work for them, it cuts down work for you, it allows projects to go forward rather than having to unmobilize or at least stop work, et cetera.
Yep.
From a contractor viewpoint, this got to be tough.
It is. That's something we can look into.
Please do.
I think,
Please
yeah,
do.
absolutely. we will.
So Walker, can you describe, so the contractor, this is new requirement. And so we're leaving it on the contractor to pull permits for whatever dosing whatever chemical treatment they want to use. And they have to go get the permit for that. In order to go get the permit for that, they have to demonstrate that they're going to do no harm. So they thought they were going to be able to meet our effluent standards using a certain dose. They were struggling to achieve that. They were having to slow down to achieve that. And so they need to prove to the agencies that a higher dose is okay. Once they've done that, we're adding to the list of chemicals that are permitted to be used in the lagoon for future projects. So every time we go through one of these, it's slow, but we're adding to the toolbox.
Yeah. And I think to add on to that, the DEP does not have a list of permitted polymers. They don't say, hey, choose this, use these dosing rates, and you're good. They don't do that. They look at it on a case-by-case basis, which is a lot of the challenges we run into with permitting these projects. So every time we submit or a contractor wants to use a polymer, granted, it will expedite the review process if the polymer is a tried and true polymer that they permitted and used in the past without adverse effects.
So it sounds like we'd call this a learning experience.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Walker. All right,
sir.
So first off, I'm really disappointed, not in you, but in this entire thing. This is actually one of our smallest projects. It was supposed to begin in April of 17. It begun in June of 18, and this group authorized an additional $400,000 to that project so that the effluent was cleaned. And essentially, they got 3 weeks into it and couldn't achieve that. I don't know what our $400,000 went for.
Well, so the payment for the effluent treatment is performance-based. So if they are not hitting those concentration targets, they will not be paid for it. The way the contract is structured, it is a rolling average, and there's a percentage associated with it.
Frankly, the money doesn't bother me. The goal was to reduce the additional amount of nitrogen that was going back into the river from the effluent. That was the purpose of this.
Yep.
And we agreed to pay for it so that they would achieve it. Not paying them doesn't solve the problem. They need to achieve this.
And that's why they're shut down instead of allowing them to proceed without meeting our targets.
Thank you, Virginia. I appreciate that. So this is our smallest project. We're way behind, and we have a whole bunch more going on.
A comment related to that, though, is that we have to be careful of that we're moving past what is standard. We're moving past what our standard approach is, and so as we add additional requirements, we need to think about what the implications of those are, because these polymers, they do work a lot different, conditions change and things like that. So hopefully, I do hope that we're working that into our future planning so that future projects can go more smoothly. Along those lines, are they doing some form of pilot testing or jar testing, something to at least give as much probability as possible so that so that they've got the data they need to have some degree of assurance on the permit revisions?
Yes, and this is, before we awarded the contract, we met with the apparent low bidder, and we had questions about their testing methodology. They provided us lab test results that showed that, when they hit their sweet spot with these certain dosing quantities, they would be able to hit the nitrogen and phosphorus concentration levels. Lab tests oftentimes are not in line with real-world situations, and I think that's part of what we're seeing here. But yes, there's a whole battery of tests, aside from, just the nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations. When we do submit the permit modification as well, they have to do toxicity testing with the dosing, so on and so forth. So there's a whole litany of lab tests that are done prior to us, pulling the trigger on this.
If we're running into this more, it might be worth, as we look at additional projects or we're trying additional dosing compounds, polymers, other treatment technologies, to consider if it's worthy of some limited scale field testing before we deploy out in the field. Even running a jar versus a 50 GPM pump in the field may be worthwhile in order to to give us a better probability of avoiding this type of issue.
I would just add too that, it sounds like there's a specific condition in the permit that was applied for, and if you say you're going to use something, very specific, that's what the state's going to allow you to do. So, it's maybe being creative on the permit application to allow that flexibility. And even though this is the smallest project, maybe it's a good one to learn these lessons before we go to the bigger areas. There's a lot of variables involved in this process. It's an evolving science. So as we learn from these type of lessons, we will get better and apply them to the next projects.
I think two final comments along those lines. I think we really need to regard this as a pilot project, and from you, the customer viewpoint, develop as much flexibility in it within the rules as you can to find out the sort of answers to the questions that Todd is posing. And secondly, as a voting member of this board, we're going to spend $250,000 dredging. We need to be good customers so that the people on the other side of the contract table want to do business with us and want to work with us. I, for one, would be receptive to a legitimate and well scrubbed recommendation from you, from staff, if there's something we need to do on the dollar side to keep this contractor whole.
Any other questions?
Yeah, one last question.
Yeah.
So, how far behind will the project be estimated?
Approximately 6 months behind, when it's all said and done.
6 months from when they started, or 6 months from our earliest projections?
6 months from the contract end date, as it currently stands.
So year and a half past where we planned to do this.
All right. Thank you.
Wait, and I just wanted to say that I feel like this proves that our process works. It proves that it works. We have set performance standards. When the performance standards weren't met, we readjusted. And I think that's the important part of this, is the fact that our process is working and that we have those parameters in place to prevent a bad outcome. And we've done that. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So flipping to the other side of the staff report, just a couple meetings this month I wanted to highlight. The West Melbourne septic to sewer, there was a pre-sewer community meeting, and along those lines we also went with the City of Melbourne staff to meet with permitting staff in DEP Orlando Central District. There are some permitting hurdles that we're trying to overcome. We're now talking to the Tallahassee staff. The way the state is set up to permit sewer expansions is really geared towards new development. And so when we're trying to do retrofit projects, we need some flexibility in their rules, and they want to work with us. They're just struggling how to do that within their rules. So we came up with an immediate workaround for Melbourne, but we're trying to come up with a long-term, better workaround for all of the, couple dozen projects that are in the hopper. The Indian River Lagoon Coalition has been working with us on a communications plan, and I think we'll have more to talk to you about that next month. But we appreciate them wanting to assist with our communication efforts.
This is the Brevard Coalition?
Yes.
Thank you.
Under the upcoming science forums and public events, I just wanted to highlight Florida Institute of Technology is having their annual TechCon. It's an all-day event on September 28th. That will be, all about lagoon research, so if anybody's interested in that. And then I know we had previously planned to have Dr. DeFries and Dr. Zarillo here today to talk about the recent modeling of enhanced circulation in the lagoon and emerging technology opportunities. They are both, it's on their calendar to be with us next month. That just today didn't work for either of them. So that is the staff report. Then you have the tables of project progress. And you had asked last month if we could add a summary section at the bottom, where were we with the previous month and where are we with the current month. And so Brandon has done that. There was also a request for a project process timeline. What does it take to get these projects? Why are projects a year and a half behind? And so this is a flow chart that shows the many steps, and if you have questions about that, please direct them to Brandon.
Madam Chair, this lagoon performance table, this critter here, helps answer the question, when are we going to fix the lagoon? And one of the answers is noting that there are 81 items out of 140 where we haven't received the scope of work yet. one of the answers is it ain't going to get fixed until all this yellow and red stuff turns green. And I think although the ball is in the court of a whole bunch of other jurisdictions, including, by the way, Brevard County, I think there's a certain amount of proselytizing, beating people up that you need to do. And I'll go back to something I said the last time. You've got an empty billet, an empty job slot. Perhaps you need to fill it with a contract wrangler.
And one of the things that is delaying a lot of these is many of the municipalities budgeted to start in the next fiscal year. So come October 1st, we should be getting hopefully a bunch of scopes of work in, and I've been in communication with them.
This says year 1, and why are we waiting to year 2?
So
I recall a sign that was in behind the desk of the repair officer in the submarine tender Dixon that refers, I think, to these various bodies that owe us stuff. Don't tell me why you can't. Tell me how you're going to. I think we need to start to lean on them.
Madam Chair. So first off, again, I want to thank you for putting this together, because for me it's really easy to understand where we're making progress and not. And the additional flow chart is even more useful to see what's slowing things down. And I see a couple of changes since last month, mostly progress, but I do have to ask about 2 of them in particular. On page 2, line 4, Cocoa Beach Muck Dredging Phase 3. The project's not complete, but they've requested reimbursement. The same situation on page 3, Palm Bay, line 2. The project's not complete, but they've requested reimbursement. And while I know there's exceptions, I thought the general policy of the tax was that we would pay after a project was complete. So why are they requesting reimbursement now?
So some of the contracts stipulate that they can request quarterly, and it's based on performance. So they're requesting reimbursement based on the amount that they've completed.
So partial completion.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Progress payment.
What wasn't clear in here?
I do think, though, there's a column that says reimbursement sent, so, and I think on those 2, which I looked at, it hasn't been sent. So even though they've requested it, I don't think any money's been sent, so it's just kind of them getting their ducks in a row, maybe, getting the paperwork in?
No, I mean, if, we have definitely sent some checks out, so if...
Okay, well, maybe we can find a way to display that, so that the reimbursement sent isn't empty, because it appears as if nothing was sent.
And then the last one on here, if I may, is the grass clipping campaign and education outreach indicates that the project is complete, and I was wondering if somebody could give us an update, if not today, certainly by next month, about this completed project, because I know it was only $20,000 that we contributed along with all the other counties, but I'd certainly like to know what our $20,000 got.
Yeah, that project is not complete, it's underway, so if the table's showing it complete, that's an error.
Okay, well, the table's showing it complete.
We'll fix that.
No? Okay, sorry. It was on my laptop this morning. Yeah, well, online, it showed it complete.
All right, the financial statement, you'll notice it's many, many pages now instead of the 3-page version we used to have. That's part of our ADA compliance formatting. And so what I wanted to highlight is on the first page of that, under expenditures in the roll-up, there are 2 lines, Save Our Indian River Lagoon projects funded under capital improvements. Those are the ones that are done in-house by the county, and the amount assigned to date is a little over $3 million. The actual spent is a little over $1.2 million. The next line is the Save Our Indian River Lagoon projects funded under aids to government agencies, and so those are the city projects, and so there's a little over $2 million assigned and $1.1 million actual. So I know we all wish these projects were moving forward faster. I just wanted to show you that in addition to running this program and managing all the contracts, we're getting our projects out faster than the cities are. So there's a lot involved in getting these projects off the ground, and I don't mean that to say that the cities aren't working hard. I'm just saying, we're all working hard, and these are not simple projects. That's part of why they haven't proceeded earlier.
So is there anything in terms of our timelines, and particularly with the cities where we have extra agreements, that because of their budget cycles, because of our budget cycles, that is problematic, or do we think we've got that worked out pretty good?
I think that, and I'm glad you asked that, because when staff fill out the request for project funding, I think, they are optimistic that they will be able to get their matching funds in their city's next year budget. If that doesn't happen, then they're in the situation that Brandon was just describing of, well, maybe they have to wait till the next fiscal year. So I think, we give people until October to try to get it in their next fiscal year. And if that hasn't happened, then maybe we want to draw those dollars back and say, that project does not appear to be viable now. We want to reassign those dollars to other projects. And if and when they're ready, they can reapply.
Is there anything either in conversation with the cities or otherwise to try to work toward getting that We've got now a continuous funding stream, so a lot of the cities face the issues, or governments face issues of uncertainty of other funding down the road. This is at least what appears to be a relatively reliable funding stream over the foreseeable future. So it feels like it might be worth that conversation to get in front of some of these city commissions so that they're starting to plan some consistent funding, so that independent of a given knowledge of what a project might be, that we're getting past that battle. Because government funding, especially the more agencies, I appreciate Brevard's getting the projects done, but when we add more government entities and we're trying to marry up those processes, it gets inherently more complicated, and the public for every one of these cities demands accountability of their processes as well. So it's challenging. I think that's probably worth some time investment to see if there's something in our overall process and sequencing and communications with the cities.
That's a great idea. We'll add that to the coordination meeting we're going to have with the cities in the next month or so. And one of the things that they did tell us last year was that our approval process, by the time it made it through the board to the county commission to be finalized, they had already missed the deadlines for several grant opportunities. So that's why we're moving our process up. So we'll have a final answer in January before the St. John's grants are due in February. The TMDL grants are due in March. The 319 EPA grants are due in April. So we're trying to get ahead of that.
Let me jump on what Todd said. Our job isn't to save money, it's to spend it wisely. We're in partnership with a bunch of other entities, and these are significant funds if you look at where they fit into typical city's budget. I think that this coordination meeting is certainly worthy of the attention of the finance directors in every one of these bodies, and given the amount of money involved and the amount of internal coordination that's going to be needed in each of these cities, probably the city manager. And you might also want to think about having just a short session at the next League of Cities meetings and let the mayors and the elected officials understand how they can get free money to do good stuff to help them with their goals in the city and re-election and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Okay. You have a pretty graph that shows we're right on track for revenues. So unless there are any further comments on staff report, we can move to the next, we can move to presentations.
Could I comment that the staff report is probably the the best monthly dump of where we stand and where the money is and where the projects are for any operation like this that I've seen. Well done.
Did we get a report on lateral lines? We funded this study. Did we get the results back on lateral line tests, smoke testing?
The county got a draft report. Utilities had many comments on that draft report, sent it back. As far as, we have not gotten the final report.
Okay.
So,
Next month, maybe?
Any day now. I desperately want that report.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Missy?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be talking about a day in the life of the Indian River Lagoon. My previous experience with this program was in New York. I was a coordinator for a day in the life of the Peconic Estuary, and so when I moved to Florida several years ago, it was a natural fit to bring the program down here to the lagoon. So what is a day in the life? So essentially, it's an experiential research, citizen science, and community-based program. And so on October 4th, students and their teachers, as well as their partnered environmental experts, will simultaneously go out along the lagoon and collect scientific information. And so what that will provide is a snapshot of what their sampling site looks like in a moment in time. Then the teacher will upload that information that was collected, and which will be available to everybody, to the public, and they'll be able to compare how their specific sampling site compares to the overall lagoonal system or entire system as a whole. So that will be happening on October 4th of this year. There are a numerous number of objectives and goals to the program. The first is we want all participants to develop an appreciation for and knowledge of the lagoon. The second is that we want the students to have a better understanding of the environmental health and stressors that are impacting the lagoon. In national news right now, they need to know what's going on in their backyard. We want to connect all Floridians with nature and the outdoors, as well as prepare the next generations of stewards to care for the lagoon and our natural resources. We also want to provide the opportunity for these students to be actual student scientists collecting authentic data. It's a valuable lesson, and to be part of something larger than themselves and their schools, to be part of a large-scale collaborative effort. So these are the schools that are participating at this moment in time. We have 34 schools, public, private, homeschool, after-school groups. So Brevard County is being represented by 9 at this moment in time. The recruitment process happened the beginning of this year, so over this time frame, this is the number of schools that have committed. We have 32 participating environmental organizations which will be partnering with these schools and these students, helping in the assistance of data collection. And what we provide to the students and the teachers to help them guide them through this day, because this is not just a glorified field trip. There's a lot of accountability that the teachers and environmental experts have to commit to. They've already attended to 2 meetings where we've had planning sessions, and we've invited environmental experts to come in and give updates on the lagoon so that they're better prepared to tell their students what's going on. So we provide a manual, and in this manual it tells them exactly what tests they're going to be collecting, the proper methodology, so there's some kind of standardization, data tables, and the reason why these tests are being asked to be conducted. And we ask them to group their students into 5 groups. The first group is going to be collecting physical data. So when appropriate, they'll be measuring tide measurements and current direction and speed in the lagoon, cloud cover, air temperature, and wind direction. Group 2, those students are doing a site description. So this is a great group to start incorporating a multidisciplinary approach, so incorporating art, math, even social studies. So they're going to be basically characterizing what their sampling site looks like, creating a map, a detailed map of what their site looks like. They're going to be collecting a sediment core, assessing the bottom type. Group 3, those students are doing biological sampling. So not only looking what lives in the lagoon, but lives in the habitat around the lagoon. So creating an inventory, looking at the biodiversity that their site may or may not have. Group 4 is a chemical analysis, so they're looking at water quality. So the students are going to be measuring water temperature, turbidity, pH, salinity, DO, nitrates, phosphates, and fecal. And then the last group, which is, I think adds a nice component to the program, is a documentation team. So this is where students who may not have necessarily an affinity towards science can really shine. So these students are taking photos of all the other students that are in action, getting their hands wet, feet dirty, collecting the data. They're going to be making documentaries and videos of the day. They will be taking pictures of all of the organisms that are brought in the seine net, so almost like a checks and balances. So what you think you have identified properly, you can then go back into the classroom and confirm that. So we're not saying that something lives in the lagoon that doesn't. This is also a place where you can start going beyond this program and bringing it into the curriculum more than just this one day. So those photos that were taken, the students create dichotomous keys with them. They can create field guides for the groups of students that do this next year. You can start doing classification work with these photos. So there's a lot of ways that teachers and the environmental experts that participate can incorporate what they do on this day throughout the school year. And so once that data is collected, we provide a website for those teachers to upload that data. And so I just kind of want to go through that with you real quickly now, just show you what it looks like. So if they go to seeadifference.org, there'll be a tab where there's a day in the life. It'll give you a brief description of the program as you scroll down, and then it'll give you a variety of tabs that you can resource. So in the resources section, this is a place where teachers can access the teacher manual, all the previous A Day in the Life PowerPoints that were presented, electronic field guides for the day, and other useful references. There's also a sampling site section, and this is what I want to show you now. So when you click on this sampling site, you'll see that there's an interactive map. So all the fish indicate sampling sites that are being collected on this day, which is a nice representation of the lagoon all the way from Volusia County down to Jupiter Inlet. And when you zoom in, we'll kind of go to Brevard, obviously, and if you click on any of the fish, it'll tell you exactly what the name of the site is, who the teacher in the school that is collecting the information, and their environmental partner for that day. This will also be, once the data is collected, it'll be shown and displayed in this section as well. And again, it's to be able to use for comparative reasons, and to incorporate into their curriculum throughout. And I'll just show you one more. So here's another one. This is down in Sebastian, Riverview Park, the school, and the environmental expert that is participating. And as I've been kind of reiterating this whole time, there are lots of ways to integrate different extensions to the program other than just this one day on October 4th. So it's it's a wonderful option for multidisciplinary approaches being incorporated into the day. It's just not a science program. It could be any discipline could use this and do this on this day. But a wonderful way to integrate and extend the day is to use your environmental experts' research. So we have Brevard Zoo who's participating, who does oyster restoration. They'll be working with their group of students to highlight that. We have MRC who will be introducing their students about the mangrove restoration work that they're doing, and a lot of the other organizations that are participating do living shoreline work. They also will be explaining to the students why that's important and helpful to the lagoon's health. Another way that teachers have chosen already to extend their day is to incorporate a stewardship component. So they're bringing a large group of students. Half of them will go down and do a marine debris survey. The other half will collect a day in the life, and then they'll switch. So they're integrating a stewardship component as well. Because we have New York partners who are doing a day in the life, we open the option for virtual pen pals. So let's communicate with the students in New York who are doing the same exact testing and compare and contrast what their day was like. I should also side note that we have a group in Puerto Rico and Italy who are also doing it, so that would be a great option as well. Science fair projects have come out of this. National winners have come out of this day, so it's a great option for students and teachers looking for science fair work. Transect and quadrant studies easily can be added into the day and compared annually. And then something I just want to mention. So as I mentioned, I worked on the New York program, and that's been now running for about 6 years. This is the 7th year. And some of the partnerships that have developed from A Day in the Life are amazing. So one thing that some of the students are doing there are genetic testing. So the organisms that they collect on A Day in the Life are then going back to the labs, such as Brookhaven National Lab and Stony Brook University, and they're doing genetic analyses on these invertebrates. And they have been able to discover 3 new species of dragonfly from the work that they did with A Day in the Life being the platform. So the relationships that can develop from this program are immense. Another nice integration is GIS mapping, a skill that we all need in this day and age. We have middle schools using this data for GIS mapping. And I am always open to new ideas and new collaborations. It's key, so I'm always open to any of your ideas. And lastly, I always end with this slide, because I'm optimistic that this is more than just a one-day event, one-time event. In my mind, it's annual, and this is the platform, and it can only grow and get bigger and better. So phase 2, I very much see a curriculum development being created for these, for both secondary as well as elementary. I'd love to see this be a true citizen science program where they're going out seasonally, or there's an adopt-a-site mentality to it. So there's ownership by these schools and students to their sampling site. I would love an app for A Day in the Life so that the students can download and input their information real time rather than have the big bulky teacher manuals and all that paper being wasted. I would love that. Hint, hint. I would also really love to have a culminating event where we can bring all students from every county and allow them to present the work that has become from this project. You'll be blown away on what you see. You really will. So it would be nice to support those students in those schools and provide that. And I would love further collaboration. We do have FIT participating and Harbor Branch, but it would be nice to have other local universities and colleges. And another phase 3 would be providing professional development. So I just recently did a professional development workshop for teachers from Indian River County who are participating. It makes sense to logically do that for each other county as well. And then again, more outreach and public awareness about the program. And finally, the ability to create evaluations and pre and post surveys. So with that said, I would love to take any of your questions about A Day in the Life of the Indian River Lagoon. Yes?
Yeah, it sounds very exciting, Missy. And
Thank you.
I'm glad that you're doing this. So it sounds like it's going to be a longitudinal study. You're going to want to do this year after year
Yes.
to accumulate the data. And, you know, that reminds me of the National Audubon Christmas count, which we've been doing here for a long time, which started in New York as well. Mm-hmm. And we've seen a lot of trends based on that data, so the citizen science component. I was curious, what type of quality control will occur on the data that's accumulated?
So that's a great question. The way that we try to address quality control is by providing the different methodologies in the teacher manual. We also provide every teacher with the same water quality kit so that at least they're doing the testing in the same way. Now they can use more sophisticated equipment like scopes and probes and other equipment, but they're asked to all at least do as a baseline use the water quality kits that we prepare. And then we also ask that if the teachers are unsure or feel comfortable asking their environmental expert to look over the data before it's submitted to me, it's an extra step for quality control.
Thanks.
Comments. One, I think it's awesome.
Thank you.
Secondly, I think every one of your slides should have a watermark on the back that says STEM, because that's what this is. And that resonates throughout the entire education system and in the minds of the public. You ought to link it to as a form of STEM, or as I prefer, STEAM. We need the arts in there too. Third, what I didn't hear was anything in the direction of marketing, communication, telling the general public about this. We now know about it. They need to. And I think that here in Brevard, Jim Waymer at Florida Today would be very interested. Perhaps Isadora Rangel would like to interview for a half hour and get you on television and so on. The last thing, we're in the business of handing out money. If this is something that could use dollar resources in an intelligent way and you can put together a good proposal, I, as a voting member of this board, would be very receptive to it.
Thank you, because as of this moment in time, we haven't had any funding up until July, where we received an IRL, Indian River Lagoon Council small grant, which will pay for the materials. So thank you.
talk to her.
Okay. And in terms of getting the word out, the municipality that I'm from, Cocoa, I did not see their schools represented.
Cocoa Beach High School is.
Okay, but Cocoa proper.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is different.
Sorry.
So there were no schools there, and for the other municipalities that weren't there, where would we start?
So
do we go to the superintendent? Do we go to the
Yeah, that's a great
principal?
question.
Do we go?
Yeah, that's the challenge that I faced this entire process. So I reached out to every school, principal, vice principal, and teacher from grades 2 to 12 through an email inviting them to participate. Those who responded were the first step, and then a lot of it was spread by word of mouth via the environmental experts that joined on or other schools.
When did that take place?
So that started around like November, December of last year, and then it was carried on early into this year as well. So that was last year's school year. And as far as getting the word out, that is a challenge. So yes, I would suggest talking to superintendents, individual teachers that you feel might be motivated or inspired by the program and like to get involved. Some of the gifted teachers have hooked on to this to provide that opportunity to their students. So it is really just talking about it to anybody and inviting them to participate and then get in touch with me.
And do you have manuals here today that we could take with us?
I don't, but I can
outreach?
certainly get that to you.
Okay.
Yes.
And in terms of partners, so you would want to probably, to make this easier for the schools, because they certainly have their hands full, you would maybe want to come to them with a partner?
So I try to hook them up with a partner if they don't have an organization that they typically work with. So yes. At this point in time, I am running out of environmental partners, or in some cases, they're sending multiple staff members to different schools to help. So I am looking for additional partners at this time as well. It's in really a month and a half. So a lot of planning has taken place already, and so we'd have to work to get those new schools up to speed. Not a problem, but yes, we would need the partner to assist them with that.
So with only 6 weeks to prepare.
We can do it. I mean, I just signed on a new school yesterday. I just can't promise the environmental expert at this time. And that's okay. Some schools actually choose not to work with them because they feel that they have the experience themselves, and that's fine. I just think that it's a really nice touch and component to the program to have that interaction. And it's not to say that next year they couldn't have that partner.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I can see long-term all of the benefits that you've identified, and students, kids getting excited and being participants for decades. I was going to ask about funding. We've already heard the answer to that. Since this extends for the entire lagoon, and I don't know if Dr. DeFries is here, but that would be, the NEP would, I think, be a really great venue for a culminating event and for coordination, because they're touching all of the NGOs and the governments throughout the entire lagoon area. So I think this may, while part of it falls here in Brevard, I think that may be the direction you ought to go. And within Brevard, and I'm going to say it wrong, the Education Foundation, which does a lot of special funding for projects right across the street, I would definitely reach out to them.
Thank you. I will.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's fun. I mean, it's a wonderful program. I love it.
Missy, I just add too that you had mentioned Harbor Branch, and
Yeah.
With their annual meeting on the lagoon, it sounds like the data that you're going to collect and the conclusions and whatever would be great to present at their annual meetings, as well as the one coming up at FIT in September, and more partnership opportunities too, as you could expose what you guys are doing. So
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you. Yeah.
if we can help you with that.
And
I will take any help I can get. So yes, if you would like to help, I will gladly accept it. Because honestly, at this moment in time, it's just me running this. Eventually, I'd like to have coordinators for different counties, but we're not there yet. So that is the idea, that in the future, we'll have multiple coordinators working together along the lagoons, because 156 miles for one person plus is a little challenging.
Okay.
Well, in addition to Brevard School Foundation, I think you probably ought to talk to the school boards. There's only 5 of them. They've got a keen interest in this sort of thing. Obviously, you're going to be kind of busy in the next few weeks, but as you prep for next year, I think that's a good place to talk to.
That's a great idea, too.
And do we reach you through the website, or do you want to give your contact
Sure.
information, since there are also people viewing this meeting?
Yes, absolutely. So my email address is info@seadifference.org, and that's SEA, difference.org. And the phone number that I can be reached is 631-806-8725. Area code 631-806-8725.
Really quick, for any schools that might want to jump on board at the last minute,
Yes.
is participation typically within a classroom, or is it open to the whole entire student body? Or
Yeah,
what
it
are you
varies.
experiencing?
It varies, and I should note that a huge holdup as to why more schools are not participating is because of transportation. So a lot of schools want to do it, but as soon as they find out they have to pay for a bus or multiple buses, they can't do it. So sometimes if they only have enough money for one bus, that will limit the number of students that participate, versus if they were able to provide 4, which then more students can get exposed to.
So busing is
Yes.
your limiting factor?
It's a huge factor. It's not the only factor, obviously. Some schools have expressed that it's just a time constraint, and they are under so much pressure that it's hard to, free up the time to do that, although they understand the value. But transportation is definitely number one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next two presenters, Beth Falls and Drew Palmer, have been working together on a project that we were fortunate to get funding from the legislature to look more closely at what is in some of the muck in the lagoon. And so they don't have much in the way of results yet. This is going to be more sort of process and what the potential is to learn from this, but I'm very grateful that they were both willing to make time this morning with our last-minute change in presentations. So, Dr. Beth Falls.
Hi. So thank you. Actually, it's turned out well because I'm really excited to tell you about the project. We don't often get to talk about how we do things. And so that's what I wanted to talk about this morning, is tell you about how we did the project in Sykes Creek in Brevard County. Before I do that, I just want to briefly talk about ORCA. For those of you who don't know about us, ORCA we're actually housed in Fort Pierce, but we work all along the Indian River Lagoon. We've done quite a bit of work in Brevard County through Virginia's support. And what we do at ORCA is applied science. So what that means is we do science that has a practical application. It's science that's done for a specific purpose. And so it's, in our case, that purpose is to reverse the degradation of the Indian River Lagoon. And so to do that, we work with many, many partners. We're very collaborative. And so when we talk about what we do, primarily what we do is we try to provide information for decision makers like yourselves and Virginia and so many others, so they can make the best decisions possible. So I like this quote that is often attributed to Albert Einstein, because you have to understand a problem before you can solve it. So what we try to do is give the information that's needed to help solve these problems, and we know we're facing many. But although we do applied science, we follow the same scientific rigor as any basic scientist. We make sure that anything we present is very accurate. So to that end, I have to admit that there's no evidence that Albert Einstein actually said this. But it's such a great quote to describe what we do at ORCA, I couldn't give it up. So we do these projects. We call them Making Pollution Visible. And our goal is to identify areas where pollution is accumulating in the Indian River Lagoon, what that pollution is, so that we can determine where it's coming from and stop it at its source. So again, we do this very collaboratively. We really focus, in most of what we do, we focus in step 1, and then we provide the information that we gather as far and wide as we possibly can so that we can all work together to do steps 2 and 3. So the project that we're doing in Sykes Creek, one thing that makes our work different is that we get a lot of information from any given study. Rather than going out and doing several individual studies, we do very dense sampling. So when we go out in the field, we want to be pretty confident that if there's something there, we're going to find it. And so this slide shows in the 12 linear kilometers that we studied in Sykes Creek, we collected samples from 100 discrete sites. So we went out and we collected samples. You can see at the top half where there's more canals and things like that, it's even more dense sampling so that we can identify where pollution is accumulating. And what we do when we go out in the field, the first thing we do is secure our boat. We now have power poles. We used to, for years, when I was doing field work, we were throwing anchors, so we're moving up in the world. But we secure our boat, and then we primarily are interested in sediment, because we're interested in what is accumulating into the ecosystem. And we're interested in the top 5 centimeters of sediment, because although legacy of pollution is very important, what we're trying to do is figure out what's coming in now. And so we collect the top 5 centimeters of sediment. And when we secure our boat, at each individual site, we collect 5 individual subsamples. So we're out in the field, we want to make sure that we're representing that site well. And so we collect 5 individual subsamples, and then we composite them into one sample to analyze for that particular site.
Dr. Could you back up one slide? We're having trouble seeing.
Oh, okay.
You were right there. Can you identify the 2 bridges or the 2 roads so I know what I'm looking at? The North Bridge is 520?
Yes, that has to be.
And the south one would be Pineda? No.
528 and 520. There's Cocoa Beach Country Club, that block on the right at the bottom.
Sorry.
528 at the north
528.
and 520 at the south. Okay, got it.
It's hard to see in that image, John, but
Sorry.
most of that green brownish area is the Ulame Wildlife Refuge between 520 and 528.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay? Okay. Sorry. Okay, so as I said, we primarily are interested in sediment, but while we're in the field, we also do collect surface water grab sampling, or do sampling. We do a whole array of water quality testing, and we also do muck depth. So at each one of those sites, we also measure muck depth. And then what we normally do, as I said, our laboratory is in Fort Pierce, Florida. So normally what we do is we collect our samples, and then we go back to the lab and we composite and aliquot and begin our analysis. This particular study, there was a lot more logistics involved because it was quite a big a distance from our laboratory. So what we did, actually, all of our field work was done in 4 weeks. And what our team did, we have an amazing group of young scientists that work for us. What they did is they actually came down to Brevard on Sunday evening and spent the night so that they could go out in the field at 6 o'clock on Monday morning and do their field work in Monday morning. And then we had a really great group of students from Odyssey Charter High School who met us at the boat ramp, who then helped us composite in the field. And then at the end of each day, one of our staff members met one of Dr. Palmer's graduate students to pass off the samples that he was going to be analyzing. So logistics, when you're teaching kids skills they need, it's logistics. Just the number of tubes that all had to be labeled and prepared and organized. So these students that we worked with were really remarkable, and I think they got a really great experience. So once we bring our samples back to the lab, we do a whole array of testing, both in-house as well as sending out to contract labs. And again, because we want to provide that information to the decision makers, we want to get as much information as we can from each sample, so we can see how these things are related to each other. If we did only a couple things and then somebody came out in Sykes Creek in a few months later and collected samples and did something else, we couldn't as confidently talk about how those things are related to each other. So what we do in our laboratory is we do something called a broad spectrum toxicity test. So what this is, so each of our samples, sediment samples, we do this broad spectrum toxicity test, and it tells us the relative toxicity. So it doesn't tell us what the toxin is, it doesn't even tell us exactly how toxic it is, it just says compared to all the other samples that we're testing in this study and all of our other studies, how toxic it is. And so the reason we do this is because there's so many potential toxicants in our environment, unfortunately. And so it's like a triage approach. So, and that's why we're really thrilled to be partnering with Dr. Palmer and his research team, because he now takes that toxicity information that we gathered and goes on with it, and he's going to be telling you what he does with that. So that's how we started this whole program, just to do toxicity, but over the last 11 years it's grown because we need more and more information. So additionally, what we do in our lab is we determine the particle size of each sample, because that tells us a lot about where the sediment or muck is coming from, as well as its potential toxicity. And so we literally hand sieve every one of our samples. So again, we have lots of students and volunteers that help us with that. In the pore water of each sample, so we take our sample and we centrifuge it down, and the water that comes out of that, we measure glyphosate and microcystin or nodularin, that's the cyanotoxin that comes from some of the cyanobacteria. And then the other thing we do in our lab is we isolate DNA from all of our sediment samples. And what we've been doing for a while is looking at bacteroides, which is the most common organism in the mammalian gut. And so it helps us distinguish where the nutrients are coming from. And right now we're looking at, you can do it species specific, so we're looking at humans and cows, so we can tell whether it's coming from humans or more agricultural inputs. And then the new thing that we are just doing, this is the first study we're doing it in, and I'm literally like over the moon that you have a grass clipping, because it's the perfect partnership. This is basically, I don't know if you guys have heard of people doing DNA for dog poop. Have you ever heard of that? So you can say your dog is pooping in my yard. Well, this is DNA for grass clippings. So in these samples that we're finding in the sediment, we almost always see grass clippings floating. And even in this sampling, we saw when we put up our sediment samples, some of them had grass clippings. So they had just recently fallen to the bottom. They hadn't degraded yet. So we will be able to say there is DNA of St. Augustine grass in this sediment. So somebody's putting the grass in and then we hand it off to your grass clipping education team. So that's the kind of work, again, that we like to do. And so then we also send aliquots off. We do various things depending on the study, but for this study we send sediment to get total nitrogen, total phosphorus, total sulfur, ammonia, and metals. We always do copper, lead, and mercury, and in this study we also did iron. And then we also send water samples off for nutrients. One thing that I somehow didn't make on the slide, but we also measure total organic carbon. And then we also send a water sample off for testing for sucralose and acetaminophen. And that is indicator of human input, and it helps to distinguish between septic and sewer. So all of that data we'll get back and pull together to share with you. So I want to just give you a sneak peek of some of our maps, but I'm going to run out of time. I can't show them all. And literally our field work went from mid-February to mid-June to mid-July. So we have done quite a lot of data, but we don't have all of our data completed yet. So we're still working on that. And then after that, we need to do our statistical analysis and then communicate. So, of course, we'll bring it to you guys first in Virginia, but then, like I said, all of our information is available on our website. We just try to get as many people as possible to know what we're doing. So just wanted to show you some examples. This is what we talk about when we say making pollution visible. Just these visually intuitive maps have been really impactful for educating the community. So this one is toxicity. It just shows the areas of highest toxicity, and this is where Dr. Palmer is going to follow up in his discussion. This one, they're not very easy to see, but this is total killed-all nitrogen, so this is organic nitrogen plus ammonia. So we can do things like, this next one is just ammonia, so that helps us kind of look at those and visually be able to see in that bottom portion that there's areas that just have organic nitrogen, there's no ammonia there. So that helps us figure out where the pollution is coming from, and you guys figure out where the pollution is coming from. And then this is phosphorus, so then you can compare, if your nutrients, the difference between nitrogen and phosphorus. Again, I'm just, sure.
If nobody knows where that is right there, that is just north of the Merritt Island Airport.
Right.
And there's a major runoff right there in the ditch that runs along Cone Road. And that empties right into Sykes Creek right there. You're looking at it.
And that's exactly, and that's what a lot of times these maps help show, because people say it all the time, but when then you see it, it's more impactful. So that's
all the runoff from neighborhoods like Merritt Ridge, around the Merritt Island Airport complex, Bel Air, Merritt Square Mall area, all of that runs into the ditch and right into the lagoon right there.
And a lot of industrial, small industrial areas.
Yep. So, when I come back, we're going to dig into this, but I'm just kind of showing you right now because I'm going to run out of time. But, so this one is muck depth. So actually, I want to say that this is one of our better muck maps, but there are some really deep pockets of muck. And because we have such deep pockets, even some of those light blue areas, still, if you look at the legend, have 1 to 3 feet of muck. So muck is such a huge problem in the lagoon, as you well know. And this is total organic carbon, and then these are our heavy metals. So interestingly, the one on that side, you can see that there's some copper, and we don't always see that. So it's worth looking into where some of that copper is coming from.
Don't go back to the previous slide that shows muck depth. Doesn't that mesh pretty well with our desire to figure out where we need to chase muck in the open river? We know about canals, but if there's some link there, it'd be very, very useful.
Right.
If you can do it for the 72 miles of Brevard County, that'd be wonderful.
We work hard. So again, I'll come back when we have all of our data and happily dig into this, but if you have any specific questions that I can answer now, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, maybe Walker or staff or somebody can do this, but okay, I'm having a hard time, and it may be my eyes actually reading in tight. I've got Google Earth up here right now on the iPad. I can see in Zoom. Can you get copies of these in slightly better visibility for us to review? Would you mind?
I absolutely can, but
it's great stuff.
Yeah, and this was like kind of a sneak peek preview, because, literally these are our managing director who does these maps. I was cracking the whip to get them, and so they're not really
Thank you.
But we will get them to you, absolutely.
Like David, I fish this area routinely. I've pulled a lot of it. I can understand, but seeing your samples in addition to the on-water experience is really useful, and I'm having difficulty reading.
Right.
My guess is that her presentation is much more visible than the screens in front of you and up here. So we can email out the PowerPoint, and that may address.
And I'm going to provide you with much better breakdowns of the areas and how the different parameters are related to each other, and the statistical analysis, and compare it to some work we did in 2015. So there's much more to come.
Yeah, and overall, I'd like to thank you guys for all the stuff that you've been doing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I had a question about the sucralose and acetaminophen.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that that's a correlation between septic and sewer?
Well, so the sucralose is not removed from when water goes through the treatment plant, and then sucralose does not get removed. So sucralose is very, very high in reuse water. And so if you have irrigation, we actually did a study in Indian River County, and we actually measured the sucralose in the reuse water that was going out for irrigation, and it's very, very high. And so if you have an area in the lagoon that's being irrigated with reuse water, then sucralose, you can't say that sucralose is an indicator of septic leakage, because the concentration, I mean, it's in the city of Vero Beach, it was like 63,000 parts per billion, and in the county, it was something like 120,000 parts per billion. And so it's very, very concentrated. And so if you see sucralose, and no acetaminophen, then you can, there's no exact science, and it drives people crazy because people want answers. And what we talk about is it's a preponderance of the evidence. That's why we also look at bacteroides and other things, because it's got to be a preponderance of the evidence to really come up with firm conclusions. But just as a rule of thumb, if you see acetaminophen, because acetaminophen is removed through the water treatment, then that's clear evidence that there's some septic input. If you see both, it's probably mixed. If you see sucralose and no acetaminophen, you can't say it's absolutely not septic, but you can't say it is. You can't use sucralose with it. If you have a sample that has sucralose and no acetaminophen, you cannot definitively say it's septic. Does that make sense?
It's much more likely that it's sewer.
It's much more likely.
reuse.
Yes,
Right,
it's much
it's
more
reuse.
likely. Yes. But again, there's no definite. So you have to be looking that concomitantly with other things.
No, that's exactly what I was asking for.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good. Yes.
Are you looking for copper because it's a common fungicide, turf fungicide?
Well, but yes, one of the reasons.
And is that covered under the fertilizer ban? Does anybody know that?
I don't know that.
I don't think copper is. I think they're allowed to continue to use minerals during the summers.
Something to tell, yeah. And really, we've not seen, so getting hot off the presses, I haven't even had a chance to talk to Virginia. But it's definitely something that we'll talk about for following up, trying to figure that out.
Well, and the, I think I'm right on this, Matt can tell me, but the dredging projects routinely sample for toxic materials before they go in dredging, right? So this is not something that we need this science to tell us what's going on in the areas that we're dredging. It'll certainly amplify it and give us a lot more detail.
Right, right. And our thinking has certainly evolved over the years. I mean, I think everyone was just so naive that no one thought it was as bad as it is. So sometimes it's just, we just need to get it out because it's all so bad. And so sometimes it doesn't even matter what the toxin is, there's just so much that it needs to go away.
So you're looking at the top 2 inches.
Yes.
There's a question in my mind, and that's where the flux is. So we take the top 2 inches off. Have you looked at what happens in the next 2 inches?
You mean post, like after dredging, or?
Yes.
So
I mean, you get this much muck. You take this much out, it's down to this. Have we changed the flux environment, and are you looking at that?
We have not done that. When we first started, we actually did do core samples, and we did, and frankly, we have to kind of triage. I mean, there's so much that needs to be done. I know that Dr. Treffry's group, I don't know if you guys know, but I mean, that's their work. And so what we tried to do and what we continue to try to do is not duplicate efforts. There's so much good work going on that we're trying to look to do the things that no one else is doing so that we can fill in all those gaps, so that when whoever's making the decision gathers that. So I know there's people who have done that. We have not done that. But we have talked about going in after dredging and seeing what the residual is. And so there's any number of things that we can do. But this is sort of, as I laid it out, how we currently do those projects. Yes, sir.
So this is preliminary, and there may not be an answer to this,
Okay.
and I'm okay with that.
Okay.
But I go back to your first slide right after Einstein.
Okay.
Identify accumulation, which clearly these graphs do. Identify source,
Right.
and then solution. So have we been able to identify source?
So the way that we identify source, there's two different avenues we go. One of the ways to identify source is the additional analyses, like the acetaminophen and sucralose, or the bacteroides, or the grass clippings. So we consider that identifying source. But the other reason, the reason that kind of this program exists and that I work at ORCA is because ORCA was started as a technology organization with the Kilroys to do the monitoring, but about a year in, Dr. Witter recognized that she needed this type of work to inform where the Kilroys go. So that's one of the ways we do Kilroys, and I know, and I stay so busy, I don't really know what's going on in that world, but I know that we do have Kilroys as part of our projects as well. So once we find these hotspots, then we can use Kilroys to track some of the pollution back to its source. So there's two different ways that we do that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we'll be looking forward to the final report.
Me too.
Thank you. All right.
Dr. Drew Palmer, Associate Professor at Florida Tech.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to come in and give you guys a little bit of an update on where we are. We're actually starting post-collection of the muck samples. So I am a bench scientist, so I don't usually spend much time out in the field. I will admit one of those pictures that Beth showed, was of me on a boat, which doesn't happen very often. But so as a personal anecdote, I've lived in Brevard County now for 6 years, and I have heard about muck for 6 years, and it wasn't until I was on the boat collecting muck samples and all of the smell and joy associated with that I realized just how big of a problem this was. So I'm really happy to be part of a project that's trying to understand this a little bit better. So with that, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of an insight into what we're doing, which is looking at mass spectrometry signatures, or trying to figure out about organic pollutants that are human-sourced that are located in the muck. So, the question about what to do about muck, so I have this nice quote from Dr. Treffery, my colleague in OEMS, about the distribution of muck with regards to inorganic pollutants. And I think at this point, with Beth's work, with ORCA, and with some of the other work that's been done, we have a very good understanding of inorganic pollutants in the lagoon. And it's clear that, they're destabilizing role in IRL health. But we don't know as much about the organic compounds that are there. And so anthropogenic organic sourced compounds, pesticides, herbicides, antibiotics, pharmaceuticals, these are all almost certainly contained in the muck, and the little evidence we have says that that's absolutely the case. And these compounds could also have further destabilizing effects or even human health concerns. And so we need to have a better understanding of what's in the muck as we plan ways to remediate it. So is dredging or aeration the choice that you want to have? How much of a concern is there when you churn up muck and you're dealing with the process, right? So it's a vital piece of information for selecting your right muck removal mitigation methods. And it also is going to help us identify potential threats to wildlife and people. And so the first project that I have on this is identifying anthropogenic organic signatures in muck. So basically that's just saying identifying these human-sourced chemicals that are going to be present in muck. There's a second aim to this project that we're not going to talk about today, but I just want to mention it, that it's looking at human-associated microbes, microorganisms, both bacterial and other, that might also be human threats. But that project's second stage to this process. All right. So if anthropogenic sourced organics play a role in toxicity, how do we identify the ones that might matter? And so towards that end, we've developed a strategy where we're going to identify specific organic signatures for these chemicals at sites of varied toxicity. And so basically we're using the data that ORCA has collected to basically identify sites of different levels of toxicity. Then we're going to go into those areas, pull out those organic signatures, and see what's there. And so here I've kind of got a map. What we've done is we're tasked with looking at 30 different sites. And we kind of struggled at what was the best way to do this. And so at first we're like, oh, we'll just look at it completely randomly. Then we thought, well, that doesn't necessarily work with trying to get to toxicity. So if we take the ORCA data as a guide, then we can establish 3 categories, right? So high toxicity, medium, and low. And so this is where they rank on the toxicity score. We take 10 sites from each of those categories, right? And so here you see a map. I apologize. I learned how to use Google Earth yesterday. So, and so this is sort of mapping a couple of those toxic sites and trying to put what the toxicity score is and put those to locations. And so we're getting a pretty good random sampling. And so this is just for 10 of the 30 sites that we selected.
Where are we looking? What is this? What location?
Same location.
Still Sykes Creek.
Still Sykes Creek.
Same location.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so then on the right-hand side, you see sort of the theoretical is basically we're going to pull out various organic signatures that we can identify. So like A, B, C, and D is in 2 of the sites, and then in the low toxicity site, there's only A, B, and C, right? And so from that, we could possibly conclude that D is likely to be a toxic species. And so that can give us a preponderance of evidence of what's present or absent that we can use as a guide. With the right standards, we can actually quantify to some degree how high of a concentration. That's what I'm trying to show in the bold, is that at this high toxicity site, A and D are found in high concentrations, while in the low toxicity site, you have A, B, and you have A, but it's not a high enough concentration to be toxic. So we're trying to get to a concept of what is the necessary dose for toxicity. Right. So then, now that we have the muck samples, what we've really been struggling with is how do we treat this as an analyte, right? So if we're going to analyze this, how do we pull stuff out of it? And so your decision on how to treat your substance has a huge impact on what you're able to get out of it, how you extract. And so after reviewing the literature quite a bit and talking to Dr. Treffry, Dr. Windsor, and some of my other colleagues know EMS, really we decided that it's a lot like sewage waste in many ways, right? It's a semi-solid, it's got a mix of water and a solid mass and fine particulate matter that we can pull out. And so that's how we've been handling it. And there's quite a bit of literature for monitoring that. And so that's actually been able to help us guide what we should be looking for. So in these processes, I will say we're going to be able to putatively identify a whole bunch of different compounds. But in order to really say with certainty that you have a particular organic signature, you need to use a standard, right? And so you have to have something that you can run it against to say, yes, it's actually this. So we have picked about 8 that we're using. You can see I've divided them here based on the class of compounds that they fall into, so whether they're pharmaceuticals, herbicides, or personal care products. And this sort of covers the general spectrum of anthropogenic sourced chemicals that we're going to be looking for. And then so in the, you have ibuprofen, acetaminophen, chloramphenicol as an antibiotic, diazepam, pravastatin. Atrazine is one of the most common herbicides, and then these personal care products that we can also look for. And the oxybenzones, I just highlight that those were recently implicated in helping cause coral reef deaths, and so there's a big interest in their potential toxicity on marine life. All right, so we've been working out our procedure for isolating, and so actually this is about where we are now is we've just completed the designing sort of a uniform process we want to use for the purposes of analyzing all of our samples. So we didn't want to have a method for doing this type of muck and a method for this type of muck. We wanted to have a uniform process. So we begin here at the far left with a muck sample. We go through a process of treating it with a couple of different organic solvents. And where you see, I see a polarity index. Basically, it's how well those compounds are likely going to move from water into these other compounds. So the lower the number, the less polar, the more greasy it is, and it's able to pull those organic molecules usually out of solution. So we do a mix of ethyl acetate and hexanes, and we sonicate that. So we have our muck sample, we pour our solvents in there, we sonicate it, it mixes, and then we centrifuge that to collect all of the particulate matter out, and then we can take off the organic solvent. We tried doing it directly with the water, but the water is nearly impossible to get it particulate-free, and it really clogs up our filters. We transfer it from the centrifuge into the little glass round bottom flask you see. We evaporate that off and we condense it down, we dissolve it, and then we run it through a process called solid phase extraction. And this is essentially just tiny little columns that are essentially what the EPA standard for analyzing wastewater effluent. From that, we condense it down to about a half a milliliter, and then we can run that on our liquid chromatography mass spec system. And what we're doing is we're doing 3 extractions for each site that we're at, and then each of these extractions are going to get 3 runs. So we're going to get 9 runs of every sample that of each site that we're investigating. So we'll highlight here at the top, we go back, what we want to do is to ensure that we're getting proper recovery. We're going to take each of our standards and we're running them through the process in an actual muck sample. So we have 30 muck samples that we're going to investigate. We have all 100 sites. We have muck samples for all of those as well. And so we've taken ones that we are not using from the 30 batch, and we're spiking those with our standards, running them through the process to see if we can optimize and make sure that get an idea of what our recovery percentage is. There is no such thing as 100% recovery. You do assume a certain amount of loss. By using the standards, we can get a good estimate of what our loss rate is and work backwards to help predict what the actual values might be. The other thing I'll say is that for each of these, we get a final volume of about 500 or half a milliliter. Each time we run a mass spec, it takes about 10 microliters. And so we can run about 50 runs of each of these samples. And so that leaves us with about 40 left over for going back and confirming, or if a new analyte of interest crops up, say there's a concern about something that might be in a water supply somewhere, we can actually test, we can go back and test against that. All of these samples are stored in an organic solvent and frozen at -80, so we'll have them, and they should be stable like that for a couple of years. There'll be some degradation, but we can still run them if new products show up. So to get a little bit into the analysis, we can separate multiple organic compounds by this. So this is I just pulled this off the internet, but this is an example of an LCMS-based method looking at NyQuil and breaking it up into its individual components. And so we can assign basically what the identity of a molecule is based on how it comes out. So the numbers on the bottom represent what's called elution time, or the time it takes it to come off of our column. And then that relative to the mass number allows us to reference into a database and assign it to a molecule. But again, that is a putative assignment. The only way to really be certain about the assignment is to actually use those 9 standards that we're going to be working with. And so those are the 9 that we can say definitively about. And so what we will provide is the 9 that we're definitively certain about, but we will also be able to provide information about what the other ones might be. And if those are compounds that you know there's general interest in, we can go back, and since we have the extra samples, we can go back and rerun standards to look for analytes of interest. So if there's a particular, if you have your favorite pollutant that you're worried about, I guess we can take a look at that, right? So as I said, we were waiting to get all of our samples. So now we have our samples and we're taking over and doing our end of this part of the project. The biological end, I hope that I'll have something to report on the preliminary starts of that by November. Where we are now is we've optimized our extraction protocols. We're currently working on our spiking methods, and we hope to be hitting the mass spec next week to kind of collect that data. So yeah, running standards on mass spec to create calibration curves now, so we'll be able to quantify those things and as they come off the spec. And then we should be running all 30 sites between September and November, and then putting that onto the map in December and January. So thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to take any questions you guys have.
Well, first of all, it's good to see people with a science background who are actually using it in their day jobs. Some of us never got there. Same comment to you that I made to Missy Weiss. We're part of the process of sitting on about $500 million over the next 10 years. If money is a limitation to what you're doing, and you can convince Virginia that a few bucks from us would advance the science and technology that we need to understand our oversight duties better, I think the door is open.
I thank you. I think part of this is these 30 sites really provide us a good preliminary sketch of how much more there is, how worthwhile is it to pursue further analysis, really.
And so the 30 sites that you have, they were selected based on your data? Is that correct?
Yes.
And were they collected at the same time? Were they? Okay, that's what I thought. But the preliminary testing showed which ones were high, medium, and low. Okay.
And so we checked the way we assigned ours randomly was essentially I just took their toxicity spreadsheet, which was sorted based on coordinates. I sorted it based on toxicity, and then I passed that off to a student who randomly picked those sites. And so then when we've been putting them up on the map, we saw that, okay, we are geographically separated over however much of a distance that actually is. But so we didn't want to be sampling two sites right next to each other. We wanted to see, can you draw a correlation between the organic signatures and the toxicity level? And so one of the things we were just talking about is sulfur as a component. And so what I didn't mention is we do have a sulfur removal step because that has to be taken out before you can go to the LCMS, or it just would make the results impossible to view. So that's another step that we've had to optimize as well.
PhDs.
Thank you very much.
Again.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just had a question. Do we have any restrictions on research through a resolution? The resolution that this was created with, I seem to recall there are restrictions.
Right, so we have projects that reduce pollution, remove pollution, restore the lagoon, and then we have a respond piece. So we don't have an ability currently for research, which is why, we're very grateful to have the legislative funds that were provided for this research.
I do, just thinking about it, those are, I think, respond. I think this research is a big part of the response, because after we do our projects, how do we know what it was before and what it was after if we don't do a response? So I understand that there are some limitations. I think those are in place for a reason, but I think this would fit in my opinion, into that response part.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Vinny. And particularly, we talked about possibly testing areas post-muck dredging, and that'll tell us whether or not we're spending money effectively or not. So I do think some expenses within this would be justifiable.
Yeah, I think this is a lagoon project plan issue, not a county ordinance issue.
New business. John.
Next. Okay. You have in front of you a piece of paper, looks like this, and I assume will be part of the minutes, certainly be part of the agenda for the next meeting. By the bylaws, if we intend to amend the bylaws, it's required that proposed amendment be submitted in writing at least a month in advance. That's what this does. This has got two parts. The first is a motion that I intend to present next meeting in September to amend the bylaws to state that the committee holds regular meetings at least every 2 months, and the bylaws language to be changed as follows. And you see it there. First of all, I have not been able to find any requirement to hold monthly meetings except the one we established when we wrote the bylaws. It's not in the ordinance. And the second thing to say just about this first motion is that it would legitimize a practice that we've adopted of occasionally canceling a meeting. Under Robert's rules, even a unanimous vote of a body cannot suspend a rule or requirement that's in the bylaws. So we've been kind of operating outside that for the 1 or 2 meetings that we canceled. If we adopt this amendment, it allows us to periodically cancel meetings without leaning too hard on the bylaws. If this were to pass, then it would be my intention, if I could get the floor, to make a second motion that you see there that says we go from having meetings once a month to having them every other month. If the month has got a number that's odd, that would be the month, January, March, and so on. The agendas would not change. They're stated in the bylaws. And we have the opportunity to hold special meetings, as you see in the text at the top. That's specified there. Vinny and I were talking a little bit. We may very well need a February meeting if we aren't getting where we need to be on the annual update to the project plan. There's also set out here, underlying the word tentative, meeting themes that the chair and Virginia and her staff certainly have the opportunity to adjust. But it kind of phases what we're doing throughout the year. As to the monthly progress and fiscal reports, performance reports that we get each month, the proposal in the motion would be that we continue to get these once a month posted online and emailed to us so that we can see on a monthly basis the things that are necessary to oversight. Why would we want to go to meetings every other month? Well, and by the way, I will tell you that what you see on the paper here has been at least coordinated with Virginia. She can speak for herself if she wants to say anything else. First thing to do to go into a meeting every other month is it cuts in half the committee's time commitment. Day jobs, professional responsibilities, I understand it has become a problem for some members to maintain the monthly meeting schedule because of outside obligations. This cuts it in half. It also cuts in half the meeting prep time, which I'm told is a big lift for Virginia and her team. It allows them to do more that's got to do with fixing the river and less to do with holding our hands creating meetings. The tentative schedule kind of plans out the year using the experience we've had with the year's work cycle. That's probably a useful thing that probably be refined. And the last thing it suggests that in May there will be a special, perhaps even day-long meeting to allow a full range of lagoon presentations as we've seen here. This approach, day-long seminar if you would, meshes with the same format that other venues by other bodies like MRC and Lagoon Coalition and National Estuary Program. That's the same format they use to present information to the public. And it allows better coordination between this body and these other outfits on what is the range of information going to the public and how it's packaged. Nothing in this precludes presentation of new science and technology at other meetings of the year, but I think setting aside one meeting especially for information and education presentation allows a certain amount of triage and prioritization so that the meeting balance, the balance of the meetings we have can shift a bit more towards the committee's main business oversight. This is here and you'll see it next month and that's probably the time for a broader discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Virginia? The proposed 2019 cost share eligibility.
Right. So you have a table, last year we looked at what our cost estimates were in the original plan for these projects, and we went through a whole iteration of dividing stormwater projects by beaches versus mainland instead of by sublagoon. So we've sort of gone through that exercise again now that we have a few projects either completed or we have full cost estimates from design consultants. We looked at how that compared to what was in the plan to update these figures. So the first one, the wastewater treatment facilities, what looks like an increase in cost is not actually an increase in cost. It's that the way that the benefit, the nutrient removal benefit was calculated in the plan was inconsistent with the way the nutrient removal benefit was calculated for other nitrogen removal from septic and sewer in the plan. So when we changed that method to be consistent with all the other types of projects in the plan, it resulted in a changed eligibility. The sewer lateral rehab pilot, while we haven't gotten the final report that John Durkee asked for, we haven't been able to implement any of those projects. You may want to consider getting requests for additional project areas, and maybe we could have those as tentative, waiting for the pilot results. I'm not sure whether you want to move forward in this next iteration of project requests for those project types. Septic to sewer is significantly more expensive than what was in the plan. Indian River County, there was a project where there were two neighborhoods sort of across the street from each other, and one was done in 2010 and one in 2014, whatever, and or 2016.
2014 and now budget for new one.
So in that 4-year time span, the cost went up like 2.5 times. So we're just, we're growing very quickly in Central Florida now. Construction costs are going up, and we are definitely seeing that in the septic to sewer expansion projects. The septic removal projects, we think we're still on target. The septic upgrades, we think we're still on target. Muck removal, and I didn't get to bring this up while Dr. Falls was presenting, but she did some of the muck toxicity, those first color maps that she showed. She did similar work in the same area a couple years ago, trying to sort of test the method. And it's amazing how much that muck has changed. And we're seeing this with Dr. Treffry's work. We're seeing this with sending the muck finders out to places that we had consultants map only a few years before. That muck is moving, and one of the things that it appears to be doing in the last year or two is, instead of being fairly shallow across broad, expansive areas, it is very deep in pockets. And so when we are calculating our benefit based on reducing the flux of nutrients out of that muck, if the same volume of muck is spread over a large area, it's fluxing over a large area, it's a very large impact to the lagoon. If it's concentrated in a deep hole, there's less flux, and there's a huge volume to be removed in order to reduce that flux. And so when we look at all of the data that Florida Tech has collected over the last year, trying to prioritize, verify where is the muck, how much muck is there, what is the area of that muck, what's the depth of the muck, what's the volume of the muck, we have a very different picture than what we had 2 years ago when we were developing the plan. And so that muck removal cost is significantly greater. The interstitial water costs, we think we were fairly close. Obviously, with the MICO project, the contractors are struggling. We're concerned that in order to hit those targets, it may be more expensive than they thought, and so there's a small increase there. With oyster reef projects, the nutrient reduction benefit is actually a little higher than what was in the original plan. When we completed studies in Mosquito Lagoon where we measured nutrient flux reduction and denitrification processes, we got slightly higher benefits than what was in the original plan, so that cost per pound is decreased. Planted shorelines were just added last year, and so we don't really have anything to compare that to, except that we have people willing to propose projects at that cost, so we're hoping those numbers are good. And then on the stormwater side, the big thing that we changed here was, we've met with our federal partners, and they are interested in working with us on projects, but they have a very lengthy process. We need to negotiate a Space Act agreement. I don't know how many years it's going to be before we can actually implement projects on the large federal land holdings. And so for the purpose of offering cost share to get things going now, we took all of those high priority basins on federal land, we sort of put them in a holding. We still want to do them, but for the purpose of calculating what the cost share should be for the rest of the county, if we took those offline, what do the remaining projects cost? And that's how these numbers were calculated. So I wanted to get your feedback on these numbers and whether you want to, whether you want us to try to recruit additional sewer lateral rehab projects in this next round, or whether we're not ready for that.
So I'll start with sewer laterals, as we've previously discussed. If the research that was done in Satellite Beach demonstrates that it is, first off, a significant problem, and then secondly, we can quantify what its contribution to nutrients is, then I would agree that we should continue to do testing, expand testing. If, on the other hand, it turns out not to be a significant problem or a significant contributor, there's no reason for us to continue to spend. So until we know, I don't think it should be in the budget. I want to come back on your muck removal. You know, 4 times as much cost per pound of nitrogen. And this goes back to some discussions that I think it was Dr. Treffray and others had, that it wasn't necessarily the depth, but it was the surface area that we were concerned of. And if it looks like the muck is gathering into, it should, our cost to remove it should actually go down. So interesting, and it is changing the picture on what we do. And my last is kind of a question. 2019, we're talking about $177 a pound versus our $89 a pound project just in Merritt Island. Am I reading that right?
Right. Think about the large amount of federal land.
But when we take a project, if the city of Cape Canaveral presents a project that they've done successfully, and we offered last year $32,000 based on $88, are we going to pay them $40,000 based on 94 this year to do the same thing? Is that what this says?
I'm not sure I followed all the math, but yes, we would pay them considerably more.
I'm not sure we can justify that.
I don't know that it's that we necessarily would pay them more for the same thing, because we still will only reimburse actual costs. It's just that cost increases or costs of doing business in different areas perhaps have changed. So if the actual costs have changed, then yes, we might pay more to get, and that's kind of the nature of the beast.
For stormwater projects in particular, the cities have been quite disappointed in the amount of cost share available. And so I think part of why some of these projects that have been on the books here for quite a while, part of why they're not moving forward is that the amount that we are, that are eligible for half-cent sales tax is such a small fraction of the project cost that they're struggling to get enough of the other dollars together to make those projects go forward.
So that's actually a comment that I wanted to make. I think our whole, when this plan was first developed, the methodology is essentially to pay at the median estimated cost. I struggle with that because if truly our mission is to get nitrogen out of the lagoon, and these stormwater projects are, the pound of nitrogen they removed is the same as the pound of nitrogen that the sewer removed. So let me just talk about those two situations. We're limiting to the median and only paying 177, but if we paid at the 100 percentile mark for these stormwater projects, we would still be removing nitrogen cheaper than the septic to sewer conversions. That just doesn't fit logically to me that we say, and there's projects that are not getting done because we're not contributing at the level to get the maximum level of nitrogen out we can. The same thing is, for instance, the septic upgrades at $800. If that's the median, let's just assume that it's $1,500, $1,600 to be at the 100 percentile. Why would we not pay the 100? That septic system conversion, we've sat through several technical presentations, and at least the claims are that the conversions are the same, are achieving the same level of nutrient reduction as the septic to sewer conversions. If we buy that, then why is the septic tank upgrade pound of nitrogen only worth $800 when if we put it on a central sewer system, it's worth $1,455? I just have trouble rationalizing that in my mind. And I gotta believe that, and especially when we're accumulating money, our revenues are up, and we've got, in my mind, a 50th percentile project of the more cost-effective projects that we're refusing to pay for. I personally would recommend that we do, over the coming months, a serious evaluation over our funding methodologies to see if there's not a better way to get money out for, in a better way of looking at our funding strategy with these numbers. And it's not whether these numbers are right or wrong, I completely believe them, but it's, is that 50th percentile approach right or not?
And I want to agree with his comments that I think that we've looked at, last year we looked at this and said it's not the same in every area because acquisition costs, all kinds of other considerations are out there. And to use a broad brush and say, well, we're going to pay the same amount to every single area doesn't make any sense. I think we have to look at actual costs and not just say, well, we're going to average those. Because you're exactly right. We're finding that these organizations are not willing to participate because of the matching that we're providing. It isn't cost effective for them in order to do that. And so our goal is to get the projects done. And if we can't get the projects done with the amount of money that we're paying, we absolutely need to reevaluate that.
Madam Chairman, during the discussion earlier about why projects were not getting done by the city, I don't think anybody raised the amount of reimbursement issue. I think the question that was raised was fiscal years and that we have to hit October, and that's why these things haven't been done. I may have missed it, but I did not hear the problem was that we weren't paying enough. It was just a timing issue. And I totally concur, and Todd, thank you. That made much more sense to me the way that you said it. I totally concur. We need to spend money to get nitrogen out, and whatever it takes at this point. But let's make sure that that's not the holdup from the problems. And I turn to you, Virginia. Did I misunderstand?
So I think cities and some cities, especially in the year zero round, they assumed that we were going to cost share, 50% or 100% or whatever. And so based on that, they may have thought that they could come up with the rest of the money they needed in the following fiscal year. The way we calculate our eligibility based on pounds of nitrogen removed, they got a much smaller amount than they thought they were going to get. So that meant that they weren't going to have enough matching in the following fiscal year, and so they would have to wait till the next year to try to, save up some more money, rearrange some things to make it a go.
So the time delay was directly related to not enough money, as the chairman
I
presents.
can't say if that's, in every single case, but I believe that to be true in some cases.
Okay, thank you.
I think we need to, I agree with what Todd and Stephanie have put forward. I think we need to ensure that the cost that we assign pounds of nitrogen projects go to the project itself and not to its county commission district. There's a political dimension to this. And if we ran into a problem a year ago where it looked like this district was going to get funded at a higher rate than this district for dollar cost to remove a pound of nitrogen. The notion that actual cost is what drives it and not what its lat lawn is really something we need to be sensitive to. I think we kind of need to get away from assigning dollar amounts for the removal of pound of nitrogen to specific geographic areas, and that's what this stormwater chart seems to do. I'm not sure how you get there. I don't know how you price out each individual project, but I fully support the notion that how much nitrogen we get out, how much nutrient we get out, is what we really ought to be aimed for, and worry a lot less and say a lot less about what particular patch of ground it's in.
I do think there's a balance too. I mean, from a practical standpoint,
the estimation
really making sure that we are being very efficient in our use of funds is appropriate. The other piece is, there may be some times that we want to spend more to keep certain types of projects moving forward, because there's benefit of learning from those and at least having some momentum in different areas that might not otherwise exist. We know sewer and sewer conversions are a big issue. It might, because there's other things beyond just nitrogen. So I'm not advocating a pure just cost strategy, but I think we need to look a little closer at how we're allocating those costs per pound of nitrogen, coupled with some of the original intent which is to keep projects moving in different arenas as well. So it's not a simple formula, but I do think it's something that we can improve what's there today and that we can craft.
Thank you again. Thank you again.
There's a lot more on this. Are we going to discuss some of these other things that are on here? I mean, consider adding funds to allow aeration, some of those kinds of projects that are going on. I think we need to include that sort of stuff. There's new technologies that are being tested out there, and if they're going to work, or if they demonstrate that they work, we need to get them into the potential, into the plan in the future. Determine if it makes sense to reduce funding for Muck, for example, and shift that to septic system removal. I've advocated that. More remove. Our plan only removes about a third of the inputs if we're successful in 10 years. And I strongly encourage us to remove more of the inputs over these 10 years that we have this opportunity. With the growth that this county and Central Florida continues to experience, I mean, it's coming in faster than we can get it out, and we need to reduce input, whether it be off the roadways, whether it be, I mean, the new stuff being built works, but we've got 50 years worth of infrastructure that needs to be replaced, that stops input of nutrients into the lagoon. I think we need to focus more on that, personally.
Virginia, I have a question about the data coming back on the muck and the fact that we've got the deep pockets that are not fluxing as much because the surface area is much less. So it seems as if the implication of that is that we leave those deep pockets and we focus on the areas that have a much greater surface area. And that would I would think it would significantly bring down the cost per pound of nitrogen. Am I accurate in that?
So interestingly, the deep pockets are actually fluxing at a much higher rate than the average that Trefry's lab had found 2 years ago. And so the total impact to the lagoon from muck flux is very, very similar now to what it was 2 years ago. It's just that instead of being spread out, it's more concentrated. So we've begun discussions with Florida Tech about, alternatives to our techniques. When it was spread out thinly, go remove it. Now that it's in these more concentrated areas, we're rethinking capping. So Florida Power and Light is just completed a little capping project where, in order to mitigate for, sorry, is it FP&L? Yes. Mitigate for impacts at the power station, they needed to restore some seagrass somewhere. So the way that they did that was they capped muck that was in a little deep pit, and they're establishing, in order to establish seagrass, to provide a shallow shoal area for seagrass. So we contracted with Florida Tech to get out there and collect data before that project happened. We're now working on contracting with them to collect, post project data. So there may be other ways that we can address that. We're also working on, the Florida Tech team has tested 2 different muck aeration techniques. Neither of those moved at any sort of pace that would be acceptable to what we're trying to achieve here. So we're working on yet a 3rd iteration of aeration technology where you dissolve the pure oxygen into the water in a super concentrated form and then inject that into the system. So, we're continuing to look at those other options. It's just, do we have a timeout while we come up with those answers, or do we, continue to offer funds to cities to, go with what we know for now while we look at alternative methods?
We're kind of on rails right now as far as workflow over the next 6 or 8 months. Virginia and her team are cobbling together recommended adjustments, changes to the project plan. That'll get dumped on us probably December, and we'll get a look at it. We're going to be pretty busy with that. When that's put to bed, when all the county commission questions have been answered and they get to a final vote on budget, I think we need to maybe set aside a little bit of thought time for some mega think projects. What would be the impact on the lagoon of having Merritt Island north of the barge canal off septic and onto sewer? What about other areas like that? Not ours to fund. There's a much broader funding base if that were to happen. But doggone it, Monroe County can put everything they got on sewer. We ought to at least be thinking about it and starting to look into the out years for how we would shape the political process, the resource environment, the roles and missions of trust funds versus sewer districts versus county commission versus grants and funding sought from state and federal sources. I think we have an obligation when we have a few minutes to to do some mega thinking. That's my daughter.
Hi. Virginia, I also had a question with the 2019 eligible cost numbers. I know the original plan had a certain amount of pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus removed. So if we take our new numbers and calculate how much it's going to cost to remove what the original plan said, are we blowing out the bank, or are we still?
So that's an excellent question. On the removal targets, those were based on they were reduction targets, right? They were all the types of projects that reduce incoming load, because we've got to get the lagoon on a steady diet. Yeah. So the muck removal targets were separate from that. Okay. And aren't those tables at the end of the plan that add all that stuff up, they're not a part of, muck removal is not in those tables. Okay. So I think what we would want to do is to rearrange the dollars so that we're still meeting those reduction targets. Yes. And there would be maybe less money for dredging.
Right.
And so, whether that means that we, leave more muck behind, or whether it means we come up with different technology to handle the muck in a more cost-effective manner, is yet to be seen.
Okay. Thank you.
That brings us to general public comment. And I have 3 cards. Craig Wallace is first, and then it'll be Lou Connick and Jenny Lamb.
Good morning. Craig Wallace, Satellite Beach, Tortoise Island specifically. This is probably not going to be something that the committee can directly address because it's not a nitrogen phosphorus issue, but it is a water quality of the lagoon issue. And since we have discovered that there are PFCs now in the groundwaters in and around Patrick Air Force Base, there is a significant level of concern, as you probably well know, the community as to what the impact of that is on all kinds of things. Obviously personal health, values of property on the lagoon, and so forth. So I think one of the big reasons that people voted for the half-cent sales tax was we wanted to clean up the lagoon and make it so that it was a place where people wanted to come to and all that. So for those reasons, I feel that the further investigation of where are these PFCs coming from and doing something about eliminating that problem should fall under the bailiwick of this committee. So I'm requesting that, I know it's not on the agenda item as of this point in time, but I would like to see it as part of the normal reports of what is going on, what are we testing, what is the objective of what we're testing for, because a lot of people are wondering where is this coming from, and it is a big concern, and I'd like to get the committee's perspective on whether this is something they would like to take on. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Lou Kontnick, live in Melbourne, and I wanted to report that you have a happy taxpayer. I wanted to say thank you because I think that the COC and the county are doing really a tremendous job in looking at the issues, in digging into them deeply, in discussing them in a data-based or data-informed and collaborative, honest way. And so as a taxpayer, I thank you for that. And going the next step, I want to say it's tragic, and I think we all agree with this, but it's tragic, the red tide and the blue-green algae and Lake O, and we can go on and on and on. And, I mean it is, it's just crushing. Having said that, I want to compliment again the county on what they're doing in terms of their communication. So the communication is beginning to ramp up a little bit. And we're seeing projects, we're seeing, planting and interviews and so on and so forth. There's a lot more to be done, but I want to honor that. I also then, in connection with the communication, which I think is so critically important, because we need to have people understanding, what we're doing, and it's slow, but what we're doing, what you're doing. I want to honor also the Marine Resource Council with their first report on the IRL health and a kind of baseline for where we are monitoring. Again, it's not 2017, 2018 data, which is unfortunate, but it is a starting point as a baseline. Really, I just want to say that we need to continue to surface the information. Boy, I wish more people would come here and hear or watch it on the video. It's a long run that we've got here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenny Lamb. I work for the City of Melbourne, so I'm representing the City of Melbourne here. And I know there's been a lot of talk about the cities and implementing the project. So when I first signed up, it was under when the progress reports that we were talking earlier. But I do want to echo most of what Virginia said, or all of what Virginia said in that regards, in that there's several reasons why some of these projects get delayed, or why maybe cities haven't been applying for things. I'm not speaking for all the cities, I just know what's happening here in Melbourne. Some of the lag has to do with the fact that, we're not sure if we're going to get additional funding, so it's not programmed in our budgets. Our budgets run from October, October through September. So if we receive the Save Our Indian River Lagoon funding, then, we either have to wait until October to start the project, because I'd say every single project that we've applied for funding for has I don't want to say a large percentage, but there is significant city stormwater utility money going into that project also. So I enjoyed the conversation you were having about changing the different dollar values that went with them. Another reason for some of the lags are the city's already started the design of the projects, and we're waiting until that gets farther along in the design process, or that we have the permits, before we start on working out our schedule with with Virginia's staff. And as Virginia mentioned before too, we also have had some permitting issues. Our septic to sewer project, and I appreciate the Virginia staff going to that, or Virginia herself too, going to that meeting at DEP to work through some of those issues. It's not complete, but we're at least working through those. And the city's excited that we have the opportunity to help spend some of this half-cent sales tax, and I say that it's not a money grab. I think that might have been mentioned before. It's not. It's the, oh my goodness, our stormwater utilities were not capable of paying to do all of the cleanup, so this half-cent sales tax is helping not just Melbourne, it's helping the entire lagoon. And some of the problem too is we'd love to accelerate the projects, but our city staff, we're committed to all of our other city projects also. So it's a timing and bringing on this additional work. And that's something that, as part of our budgeting process, we are working on sort of reprioritizing some staff, or possibly gaining some additional staff, so we can implement even more of these projects, so that we can help out the lagoon too. So I just wanted to bring all that up so you could hear straight from a city what our perspective was.
It sounds like perhaps the column that says scope of work received has got the wrong years in it. That what you're saying is something we've got earmarked for. We expect to get your scope of work in year one because it was funded in year one. Really, we shouldn't expect that till year two. I suspect that scrubbing line item by line item against the bodies to figure out what's their answer to when it ought to be expected would update our green, yellow, blue chart.
Well, and from my side of it, I will admit the city, our first initial submittal of projects for that first year, we were very ambitious on what we could do. And so some of that is our fault that we have not moved ahead, and we're trying to catch up with those.
We would like to look at reality. So if there's a better reality that can be noted on paper and change the colors of these suckers, that'd be useful.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your perspective. All right, final comments. Yes.
I find, speaking of Virginia, speaking about the movement of the muck in the lagoon and its pooling, I find that subject fascinating. And I think it seems to me, when John talked about it and Stephanie talked about possibly reducing costs, it seems to me like there's a world of maybe new opportunity to do something. And it sounds like Dr. Treffery, it would be great to invite him back in. I'd love to hear about how this is happening, what causes it, what new opportunities it might present. I think that'd be a great, in my opinion, a great opportunity for us to learn more about that and how it can help us.
Quick question, when might we expect to see the first working draft of the next year's project plan? Just information question.
I think it was January.
January, thank you.
At some point, Virginia, I would like follow-up on the permitting issues with DEP that Melbourne and the county is experiencing. It is priority for us to remove septic systems that are built in 1960 and are still contributing nutrients into the, and if we're not allowed to do that because of some kind of state permitting issue, we need to know whose doors to go rattle, or let John go rattle their doors.
So the issue is where the community that you're trying to add is at the bottom of a hill, and a gravity sewer is just next to impossible, really infeasible, or it's completely coquina ridge that you'd have to blast out. If it makes more sense to use a force main, the state is wanting the local utilities to be responsible for, or have a maintenance entity responsible for the private pumps that people will need in order to pump their sewage from their house into that force pressure line. The people have been responsible for their own septic system for however long. And when their pump fails, they are the ones who will know first, and they are the ones who will want to get it fixed and will, keep calling plumbers until they can get somebody to come. So the utilities aren't set up to be that maintenance entity to go onto people's private property and maintain their private equipment, and the rate structure that all the other people hooked up to the utility, what they pay for is not to go maintain some other private person's pump. And so the workaround right now was that Melbourne was allowed to just submit a permit application for the dry line. And DEP checked off on that, and then as individual homeowners want to connect to that line, there's no state permit required. They have to come to the utility to get permission and to pay to hook up to that line, but there's no state permit required. And so there is that workaround, and I talked to the assistant secretary over the water projects and over the permitting end of things. They both understand that this is an impediment to getting septic to sewer projects done in these retrofit situations. Ben Melnick, who was here and presented to you last month, I've spoken to him. He was going to get with the Orlando district people and try to come up with some potential solutions. We've been playing phone tag for the last couple days, so I don't know what they're going to propose as their potential solutions, but I think, we do have support from the top down that they need to come up with a solution.
Thank you.
So it sounds like in that situation that the private homeowners are going to be responsible for purchasing a pump to pump theirs up to the dry pipe?
Well, the way the funding is supposed to work is that we would cover the initial installation costs.
Of that pump?
But everything that's on their private property,
Yes.
just like everybody else who hooks up to sewer, is responsible for their lateral lines. They're responsible for getting their waste from their home or business
Into the main.
to the right-of-way, to the main. And so the pump that's on their property to help make that happen, they would need to be responsible for.
But we are helping pay for that initial installation of that
Yes.
pump?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't understand how these things work, and I'll probably have to ask one of my neighbors that designs them, but technically, is it possible that that pump could be at the main line, thus drawing, and on public property so that it will be our responsibility, versus back at the home, we're running through the lateral line, pushing? Is that, Todd, you might know about that. Is that a theoretical possibility?
Wherever you locate it's going to function essentially the same, but you've got to be careful putting a lot of that mechanical type of infrastructure inside of a right-of-way, because that ends up with maintenance issues from a public works standpoint.
Okay.
And then the other, but I'm a little confused on the permitting side, because there's private pump stations put in lots of places that don't include, so it sounds almost just like a permitting strategy piece.
They pointed to some 1981 handbook, and yeah. So they're wanting to permit these systems like they would permit new subdivisions on low pressure, putting in an application for a low pressure system. And we've said, that's not the situation. Don't treat us that way.
And this is the state?
Yes.
Is it Central District or?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, we are adjourned.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.